One of the things that we've had a delay, not a delay based upon technological failure, but we've had a delay because I've been on the phone with our guest for Sunday night. He's a very well-seasoned gentleman. His name is Ivan Rogers. He has written a book, but after reading his book, I was more than impressed with him. Reading several of the comments on Facebook, I've been very impressed with his heart, his language. He's a very impressive individual, that is, in his writings. But after speaking with him, I was just overwhelmed with, from time to time you meet people who just wow you, and he's one of these people who wows people. I mean, he is going to be an awesome guest on our show. That is this Sunday night at 8 o'clock. I would encourage you to invite lots of people to view the show, especially those people who are from a Protestant background or a Catholic background. I think that what this man has to say, and he doesn't speak as a novice. We're talking about a man who has been in the ministry for 60 years. We're talking about a man with, well, I'm not going to go into it now, but he will share this with you. You're talking about a man of integrity. You're talking about a man who has a story, who has the experience, who has a message, who arrived at some conclusions that are wonderful. And this is going to be an awesome show. With that stated, I also need to brag about Bob Graves in speaking with him today, and with all the work he's putting into his show, The Unconventional Pastor. Wow, it's coming along quite well. I think that by the time that we get to August 12th and we come out with all of these new shows, I think that people are going to be standing outside simply to listen to words of integrity, words that mean something. And Bob, he gave me just various ideas about what he will be dealing with and people who he will speak with, etc. And it was just wonderful. And we have another show that I'm very excited about, and that's and we still haven't named it. I'm still contemplating this, and this is with a biologist. This biologist is actually an atheist, and this atheist, and should I stop? It looks like we've lost our feed. Greg Bray is a biologist. He's a wonderful person, and I have to brag about how wonderful of a husband, father, just person he is. Because most people, when they think of atheist, and I'm talking about from the theistic position, I think that most people think that atheists are horrible people, and that's not true. Most atheists are wonderful people, very reasonable people, and I can't brag enough about Greg Bray. He's awesome. Many of his friends, colleagues who I have chatted with on Facebook, they have been more than kind, patient, respectful, and I can't brag enough about them. But we have this show with Greg Bray, the biologist, and Bob Graves, the theist, and they are going to sit down respectfully and have this awesome discussion. And this discussion will be not just these two, but also various atheists and theists. And so, yes, my wife and I decided that we are going to support atheists. We love atheists. We want to include them in the conversation. We want Gnostics, agnostics, and theists and atheists in the conversation. We're not interested in people agreeing with us. We're interested in looking at facts, because after one looks at facts, it's not a matter of choice as to what you believe. It's a matter of, wow, I didn't believe that humans could fly, but once I was on that airplane, I was convinced otherwise. And so facts tend to change one's mind, that is, in various ways. And so we are quite comfortable in our skin, that is, supporting atheists, loving them unconditionally, not trying to convert them. I'm not trying to convert one atheist into a theist. In fact, I made a statement the other day, and I appreciated the honesty of one of our friends after making the statement. I said, I would rather be called an atheist these days than I would be than being called a Baptist. And when I said I'd rather be called an atheist than a Baptist, there was a little bit of shock, a little bit of ripple. That's all right, because we need to get past our bias. And the only reason that I said that had to do with, I think that atheists need to be respected and loved just as much as we love Baptists. And I think that just as much as we would respect a Baptist, we should also respect an atheist. In fact, I think that the atheists have a more, I think they have more on the ball when it comes to morality than the Baptist Church does. But I will go into that in another, into that kind of talk at another time. Chapter 3, the book of Ephesians. This book is quite exciting to me. It deals with the kind of content that really revolutionizes our minds. For instance, if I were to pick a verse out of chapter 3, and just to say, let's start with this one. I always encourage people to read the entire book, but I'm quite certain that you're more than capable of reading the book at another time. And so we're going to spend this time wisely, assuming that most of you guys have done the read and know what it says. I was asked the other day in one particular group, why are you saying the same thing over and over again? We find that to be educationally poor. And my reply was, I don't think that you understand education, nor do I think that you understand the process of education. If we look at, for instance, a classical education, it's divided into 3 parts. We have the knowledge provisional years, and during those years you're simply there providing particular paradigms. You're providing a child or an adult with knowledge. It's not true that you're trying to get them to think it through. It's not the time for logic. It's the time for just memorizing certain things like 2 plus 2 equals 4, or your times tables. And it's just learning basics like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's learning those things, and with that you have to have redundancy. You may have to look at the letter A 10 or 15 times over and over again to really make sense of A, and then B, and then C, and then various vowels. And we need to understand that with adults and children, we use classical methods of educational processes. Therefore, the knowledge provisional years are essential. And in that context, you will be, a good teacher will always be redundant to make sure that you have the information. Because the challenge during the educational period is not to question, is not to wrestle with the content. It's just to get the content in the computer or the mind. And so the point is, in classical education, what you do is you provide the knowledge and you spend enough time just providing knowledge. And it may be repetitious, and normally it is. The second point is, in classical training, you're going to go into that logical phase of it. You learn something and then you want to question what you have gained knowledge of. In other words, you don't want to be like this person just sitting here accepting anything and everything. And good knowledge provisional teachers will not say, simply because I'm providing you with this knowledge, this is the end mark to your educational process. This is not the end mark at all. In fact, you're going to question everything that you've ever been provided. You're going to be taught to question everything. This is in the setting of a good classical educational system. And so you have the knowledge provisional years, and then you have that system of teaching people how to think about what they have come to know. These years of using logic, learning how to use logic, learning how to question and rethink everything that you have come to know. And then the third phase of classical education would be called the rhetoric stage, the stage in which you learn how to speak and write efficiently concerning what you have wrestled with logically and come to know. And so please understand, these processes are used all the time. And then I was asked by another person, then why are you using this process with me? I'm an adult. And I stated, it's just not for children, it's also for adults. For in these United States years ago, many people had to state that slavery was wrong. Not just 3 or 4 times, they even had to pick up picket signs and nuance that point, not with one picket sign, but, a dozen or so, just to make the point, just to make the image there. This is why we have commercials on television to enunciate things over and over again so we can get it. If you watch children's TV, in other words, these various kinds of programming, you're going to find redundancy as a big factor. And you're going to see that everything that they're attempting to teach, you're going to see redundancy, something coming up over and over again. And that's true in advertising, that's true in many different areas. But in these United States, when people were saying slavery is wrong, the argument had to be with the same language over and over again, over and over again. And people did get tired of hearing the same old same old. That's true. The point is, when you ask one who is intoxicated, one who is drunk, and please understand that our sheriff's department, they pull over people all the time who are so drunk, they will ask them, what is your name? Not just one time, not 2 or 3 times, but sometimes 15 times. Because people who are intoxicated really don't want to address or can't address what their name is. And the same thing is true with religious people. Religious people have become so intoxicated when you ask them a logical question, a moral question about slavery, about the slavery in the Bible. Is it moral? Is it ethical? They will normally say yes, yes. And you ask that question over and over again to see if you can get past that intoxication level. You're not trying to suggest anything differently. You're trying to get them to sober up, maybe for but a moment, like you would some drunk on the side of the highway, just to try to get him to say, this is my name. You're just trying to it's not a sense of sobering up. I think it's just trying to draw attention. Maybe you can impact the mind somewhat. And so we ask questions like, is infanticide, the doctrine of infanticide, is that moral or wrong? Why do we keep doing that? And it's because we need to educate people that the doctrines of infanticide, genocide, and slavery are wrong. We're going to keep educating people to those facts. Now, it is true that the religious community, they don't want to hear those questions over and over again. They're very intolerant, just like a drunk is when asking a drunk, what is your name? They're very intolerant. They don't want to be asked that. And they will insult you by saying you're not using educational processes. And the truth is, actually, we are. And this is what Paul is stating in chapter 3 with verse 6. He says, this mystery. And he's talking about a mystery that he did not speak to or about, just in this particular setting. This is not the first rite. This is not the first time that this subject ever came up. For instance, let's talk about this mystery possibly with a different swing, a different people, because I want you to see Ephesians chapter 3 for a moment in the light of how Paul was viewing this mystery. In chapter 2, verse 6 of 1 Corinthians, we find that Paul says, we do, however, and I want you to listen to what he says. We do, however, speak a message of wisdom. Now, I want you to note something, and this goes along very much with what I've been teaching tonight. Notice verse 1. He says, when I came to you, brothers, I did not come with eloquence or superior wisdom. I could not speak to you with eloquence. Sometimes what you have to do is, and some people would suggest, well, this means that Paul was not eloquent. That's not what the Greek is suggesting. The Greek is suggesting the people could not stand eloquence. If you use eloquence with some groups of people, they are offended. And this is the way that Paul was. I don't have to use eloquence here. I didn't come to you with eloquence. You know that I really toned those kinds of language usage just down. I don't have to speak like a scholar. Now, please listen to me. I came to you not like a scholar, not with someone with superior wisdom. I didn't speak down to you. I was not trying to use intellectual snobbery. This is what he's trying to report. He's trying to suggest, look at me, look at who I am. I'm speaking to you honestly. I proclaim to you the testimony about God. What do you mean he proclaimed to them the testimony about God? His entire message is about Jesus. When he speaks Jesus, he speaks God. But these people, in a sense, they don't want to look at the possibility of a human being God. And I think that's true in Christianity. We don't want to look at God as being so close to humanity. We want to make God at a distance. He's just so far above us, he doesn't really have human capacity. And I think possibly we need to rethink that, because there is something wonderful about God. He is not afraid of being human around us. I'm not talking about 2,000 years ago. I can tell you with certainty that God doesn't mind being human in you. It's not all about being this theos or God in you. It's about God being in you. He's not against humanity at all. But religion paints God as one who is too good for human beings. Religion has always mastered in foolishness. It always has mastered in making people feel very condemned. It has always mastered in making people feel judged, guilty. The church has always mastered in making people feel as if they were sinful. I was talking the other night about this very subject, Jesus taking away the sins of the world. It's not true that that's an accurate translation. I can simply ask this question: if Jesus took away your sins, why are you still sinning? And someone will say, oh, this is talking about legal justification. This is talking about God gave me right standing before him. That's nonsense, because if love doesn't keep a record of wrongs, that argument can't be argued. If we clearly look at what it means, that is, Jesus took away the sins of the world, it means that at one point in time, man came up with this idea that we were sinners, wretched, so wicked that we could not even stand in his presence. But when God came in human form, he stood in our presence. He ate with us. He drank with us. He healed us. He fed us. He clothed us. And he even bowed before us and washed our feet. So we can't make the argument that God will not allow us in his presence if we are wicked. In fact, if we do a proper rendering of chapter 13 of Love Not Keeping a Record of Wrongs, the idea there is that God doesn't look at us in any context and ever say, you're evil. The concept of evil came from human beings. It was a reaction. Now, you can look at various cultures, various people groups throughout history, and you're going to find some people saying, well, that's evil. That's good. That's good. That's evil. That's good. That's evil. And you're going to find people have various opinions about this, and we are going to get into a discussion. There are 4 different philosophies about this good and evil, which we will discuss in times future. My point is, did Jesus come to take away the sins of the world, or did he come to take away the doctrine of sin? The doctrine of sin that was in the world. Because the doctrine of sin that was in the world was like this: the wages of sin is death, and to transgress, that is, to miss the mark with God, meant that, and I'm talking about in Judaism, you were guilty of not just part of the law, but the entire law. That is, if we go by one rendition of the Abjad. My point is, when we analyze this and start looking at what Jesus actually did, if Jesus takes away sin theology, are we better off? I keep making the argument that Jesus wonderfully nuances sin as a sickness. He doesn't treat sinners as wretched, but he treats sinners as sick people. He treats sick people as if they need a physician. So when he looks at your sin, he's not looking at your sin. He's looking at your sickness. When he's looking at your sickness, he's not looking at you like a judge. He's looking at you like a physician. What is he interested in doing? Condemning you? No, I didn't come into the world to condemn you. I came into the world to save you. That is, to heal you. The whole idea is healing, not this saving. It's, he came to heal me. He came to rescue me in that sense. These doctrines of soteriology are, I think they have been confusing us for so many years. We've been indoctrinated with these various doctrines for so long that we can't think. And so Paul was actually going to a group of people who had been paganized. We're not talking about people who were not familiar with God. We're talking about people who were very familiar with God. I should say gods. We're talking about these polytheists. Now, some people think that the Jews were monotheists, and that did not take place until about AD, about AD 100. That's another teaching. So he claims here in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, I did not come to you with, my ability, that is, in speaking, my eloquence. I did not come with intellectual snobbery, that is, to speak down to you. I did not come that way. I simply came to you to proclaim the testimony about God. He says, for I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except one thing, or except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The reason that he nuances the issue of crucifixion, it's because the issue of crucifixion meant that this Jesus Christ was by definition cursed of God. And these pagans knew that. These people in this particular church at Corinth, they knew that, if you're placed on this torture stake with a cross member, you're certainly cursed in some sense. Please understand that the Jews were not foreign to borrowing different theologies, various theologies from the pagans and the pagans from the Jews. They went back and forth with all kinds of things. It's much like what the Protestants do within their various denominations. Let's keep going. He said, I came to you in weakness and fear with much trembling. I'm not convinced that most people know what this means, but I will speak to it in short. It does not mean that he was a weak individual. It does not mean that he was trembling. It doesn't mean that he was afraid of these people. The way that he uses these particular terms, 3 to be exact, he uses these 3 words in this fashion. I simply came to you. Speaking to you. But I was afraid that you would not receive what I was saying. In other words, this that we have, weakness, fear, much trembling, is simply he's afraid that they will not listen to what he has to say. Oftentimes when we're speaking with religious people, they're not going to listen to stories like there is no hell. The first thing that they're going to say, and they do, they will laugh. Well, why did Jesus die if there is no hell? That's normally their first question. And so they're simply going to dismiss that thought real quick. And so Paul too was placed in this very troubling context. He's talking with people who do have a sense of religion in a major way. He said, I came to you in weakness and fear and with much trembling. I'm afraid that you're not going to listen to what I have to say. He said, my message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words. In other words, I'm not trying to convert you. I wish people would get verse 4. I keep telling people, I'm not interested in converting atheists. I simply love them. If they will look at the facts, if I will look at the facts, at some point we're going to arrive at the same place. It's a journey for all of us. It's not about making some kind of decision to make Jesus my Lord and Savior. It's not about making the decision that gravity is going to hold me to this ground. If gravity is holding me to this ground beneath my feet, it's not because I trust gravity. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words. I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm not trying to be the wise person here. I'm hesitating. I want you to get the point. He said, but I did come with a demonstration, namely of the Spirit's power. Now don't go too far with this. The Apostle Paul was more interested in these people having an experience. Let me restate this. He was more interested in them having an experience than he was in them remembering his rhetoric. Oftentimes, in theology, we're more interested in people memorizing our rhetoric than we are in people experiencing God. The Apostle Paul wants people to experience God. I'm not so interested in converting you. However, you may not listen to me. I have toned my intellect, my ability to speak to you. I've toned everything down. I'm afraid that you're not going to listen to what I'm saying, but listen. I'm not trying to persuade you. I'm not trying to be wise, but I'm convinced that there is this demonstration of the Spirit's power that's more efficacious in this argument than my argument. And I hope you're hearing this. In other words, the Apostle Paul is simply saying, listen, listen, listen. It's not my intellectual argument that will get you there. It's the demonstration of God's power. Paul was convinced if God is real, he was convinced that he did not have to convert the person. He was convinced that his argument didn't have to be memorized. He was convinced that God would do what he does best. And so it's true. These people started having these experiences, if history is true. Subjective as that might appear, it's true. These people were having experiences. And Paul was very interested in this. And please understand, he does not say, listen to my doctrine, listen to my words more than listening to God himself. Paul did not encounter, and you guys will possibly refer to him as Saul, did not encounter a linguist on the road to Damascus who gave him rhetoric. He encountered God. When you encounter God, the argument over God existing ceases. I'm not suggesting that rational arguments cannot be made. I'm simply suggesting in this context, Paul was quite convinced it's not my intellect, it's not my ability to speak wise or persuasively that will win here, but it's the demonstration of the Spirit's power. In other words, Spirit would be better translated here, how God expresses Himself, that is, in you. And this term power here would be better understood as the way that God expresses Himself in a meaningful way. Each individual is thirsty. We have this thing that's quite innate. We're thirsty. And Jesus speaks about quenching this thirst. The Apostle Paul knew that one day his thirst was quenched, and he knew that God's expression, that is, His meaningful expression, could and would quench the thirst of these people. I will applaud that. So this is not about intellectual argument here. This is about an expression that happens in a meaningful way in people's lives. Now, we can call this expression love. Some people argue it's best to call Him God. I would question, why do you want to call God Him? And number two, do you really think that if you were God, you would want to be called God all the time if you were simply dealing with your children? Good fathers do not say, please call me Father all the time. Sometimes kids simply cry out in various forms. They say help, and we know the cry of a child, and it's much variegated from child to child. They just react differently. He said, I really don't want your faith to rest on men's wisdom. In other words, what men have been telling you. You guys have been involved in polytheism. I came from people who borrowed from you. This is a real situation here. The Apostle Paul, he's painfully aware his family, the Jews, they had been borrowing from the pagans and the pagans from the Jews, and they've been killing each other, and they know the stories. They know the legends. They know the parables. Paul says, let's bypass all of that. Let's have an experience. It might be subjective, but let's allow something to be demonstrated in our lives. We need this demonstration. We need this demonstration. It's not about me being eloquent. It's not about me coming to you as one who can speak down to you. It's not about that at all. It's about this expression that's meaningful in all of us. And it really doesn't matter how you label it or what or who you label it. It's not that important, because God, or we can say something different. It doesn't hurt His feelings. He just wants to express in a meaningful way And I only use the word his simply because I'm still addicted to Christianese. It's hard for me to speak about these things sometimes. Oftentimes I try to tell my Christian friends about what we actually have versus what we are pretending to have, and they get angry, they get mad. And I can identify with Paul in this setting. You love people, you want people to understand. You're not really wanting to make people feel bad. You don't want to speak down to them. You will do anything in the world just for them to have this meaningful demonstration of an expression. We can call this expression love, and that's fine. That's all we have to call it. We don't have to call it anything more than love, and that's fine. If we can say, oh, I've experienced love, we should applaud everyone who has experienced love. We don't have to attach that to A, B, or C, or D. That's not the important thing here. God is not selfish. I don't have to say God and God and God and God over and over again. Religion has forced that term into my head. And so, in a sense, I'm just like the drunk man. I keep jabbering. He says, we do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature. We're talking about people who can handle this. You know, sometimes we have to be left alone until we grow up. We're not ready for it. We're not ready to experience things. And I think that the church has taught us to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And Paul was very wise. No, let's wait until people mature. We don't have to push this into people. This is not indoctrination 101. This is about being patient enough until people are mature enough to handle such a position. He said, but let me make this clear. This is not the wisdom of this age. So don't think for a moment when I say the message of wisdom, please don't think that I'm talking about the wisdom that we generally talk about. That is in this age. He says, or of the rulers of this age. He said, I don't want you to think that the rulers have been using this kind of wisdom at all. I don't want you to be in the dark as to the kind of wisdom that I'm talking about. And please understand, the rulers of this age, they are not speaking the same thing that I'm talking about. Let's get on the same page here. And please understand, I know that some of you guys are not mature enough to have this conversation. I'm not trying to speak down to you. I just understand that at one time I was not mature enough to handle anything, but on the road a demonstration took place and it changed my life. He said, no. He said, we speak of God's, and he's using the term gods simply to speak in theistic terms. These people understood the idea of theism or polytheism. No, we speak of God's secret wisdom. When he brings up the idea of secret wisdom, he says it's the idea of God's secret wisdom, a wisdom that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. I can't imagine being there that day hearing these words. What do you mean, a secret wisdom? A wisdom that was hidden, that was destined for our glory before time began. What do you mean none of the rulers of this age understood it? For if they had, they would have never crucified the Lord of glory. What are you talking about? You're stating that you came preaching Jesus Christ and Him crucified, and if we would have had this wisdom, we would have never crucified Jesus? What does that suggest? If we would have had God's wisdom, we would have never crucified Him. What does that suggest? If I had the wisdom of God, I would have never crucified Jesus. For all of those who are practicing doctrines of atonement, all of these various crucifixion stories and applauding the crucifixion, square this up in your mind. If you had known what God's wisdom was, you would have never crucified Him. God wasn't looking for crucifixion. Religious people were. This speaks volumes, but this is about Paul saying it's about how God expresses Himself in a meaningful way in you. This is not about me coming to you, telling you the gospel that Jesus Christ died for you 2,000 years ago. He died for your sins, and if you will trust Him as your Lord and Savior, you will be saved and you will go to heaven. It's not about that. It's about something that's real. It's not about a myth. It's not about pagan theology or the theology of Judaism. It's not about that. He's talking about if we would have actually known that, if we would have had that wisdom, we would have never crucified Him. Think about what that implies. Wow. Well, Dr. Jones, you're implying that the crucifixion isn't what I've been trained to think it was. Yes, you're right, I'm teaching that. But I'm not the first one to teach that. Paul claims you would have never done this if you would have had God's wisdom. What do you mean? I would have never crucified Jesus if I would have had God's wisdom. So God's wisdom says no to crucifixion. Hopefully, someone's getting the point. I'm not looking to impress you. I do hope that you're mature enough to handle an encounter, a demonstration of an expression that's meaningful. Right now, you may not be there, and that's fine. But I'm hoping that you will keep coming back to the conversation. Paul went to the church of Corinth, wrote to the church of Corinth, wrote to them time and time again. He loved them. He was not trying to convert them. He was interested in them having this meaningful experience and knowing what it means to be loved. Thank you for your time.